The last of this series of videos, we're going to talk about the origins of Russia. Now, Russia is made up of Slavic peoples. Historians do not know a ton about the earliest history of the Slavs. So if we go way, way back, we're not completely sure, but what we do know is that they most likely originated in the steppe region to the northeast of the Black Sea. And so the steppes just refer to a plateau type region. So very sort of grassy land, good for grazing animals, not so good for agriculture. And they were Slavic. Slavic just refers to the language groups that these people spoke. And what we see is that there were three different identifiable Slavic language groups that emerged by around 500 CE, so the same time as Justinian about. So there were the Eastern Slavic people. They are eventually going to evolve into present-day Russian people, Ukrainian people, and also, actually really, mainly Russian and Ukrainian. And then we have Western Slavic people, which are going to evolve into Polish, Slovak, and Czech. And then we have Southern Slavic people who are going to emerge into Slovene, Croatian, and Slovenian peoples. Originally, just like some of the other earliest societies in history, they lived a hunter-forager lifestyle. So it was really dictated by their environment. As I said earlier, the steppe region that they came from, the soil was not particularly fertile. So we are experiencing people that are moving from place to place along with their environment after their food supply. But in the northern regions, there was more forest, the land was more fertile, but because of the climate, the growing season was shorter. And so, of course, you are going to experience people that had to be more versatile to their environment. And as technology evolves and they find better ways to preserve their foods, they are going to be able to live there's going to be able to be a much more sustainable population in these regions. So, the origins of Russia, or the Kievan Rus, as it was originally called. The Eastern Slavic people, so what made up present-day Ukraine and Western Russia, they're actually going to be ruled by outside invaders. The Viking peoples, who originated in Scandinavia, so these countries in Northern Europe along the Baltic Sea, we know that in the earlier years of the Viking invasions, they're actually targeting Western regions. We tend to think about Vikings more as people who were ruling places like Iceland and Greenland, right? But the Viking people also ended up pushing west. And as we can see here in this map, by around the 9th, 10th century, the Viking people actually came in contact with the Eastern Slavic people. And by the end of the 9th century, the Vikings actually took control of Eastern Europe and ruled over the Eastern Slavs. The Viking rulers called this region the Rus, or the Kievan Rus. And this word later is going to become Russia, right? So the earliest of these Viking rulers that we talk about was this man here, Oleg, and he was the person who established the Principality of Kiev, or Kievan Rus. And here it is on the map. This was sort of the earliest state of Russia. Kievan Rus was a series of city-states. They governed themselves as long as they paid tribute to the main ruler. So this is a more decentralized government. So we can contrast this from the Byzantine Empire, which we just talked about. So instead of this sort of more centralized bureaucracy, the Kievan Rus was ruled by a council of boyars. Boyars is a Russian word for noble. We'll talk about them later as well. So boyars did things like elect the local princes of the regions, and they also, if there was a war, they served on a war council, so they basically dictated military strategy. And the boyars also worked to represent the people they governed, so they actually spoke on behalf of the entire population. So some people see this as an early form of democracy, but there are limits to that because the only people that could join the Council of Boyars were Viking military leaders. And so, of course, if you had Slavic origins and you were from the more common part of the agricultural population, you could not rise to become part of this group. The Kievan Rus is also really significant because we're going to see that it is going to embrace the Eastern Orthodox Church, which came from the Byzantine Empire. So what we're going to see is that the Byzantine Empire sends a large number of missionaries to convert the people of the Kievan Rus to Orthodox Christianity. There is a general wish, of course, just to spread the religion, but also when the Vikings came over and started ruling this region, there was a fear in the Byzantine Empire that the Vikings themselves would spread more of their pagan traditions to the region. And so there was this general desire to just spread Christianity, but they also wanted to start to wipe out other outside religions that they did not want to spread to the region. Christianity really becomes consolidated in Kievan Rus under the leadership of Prince Vladimir I, or Vladimir the Great. He ruled from 980 to 1015, and the reason why he spreads Christianity to the region was, first off, because he was really attracted to the wealth and the beauty of the city of Constantinople. He married into the Byzantine royalty. He married the sister of the emperor of the Byzantine Empire. And when he married her, part of the agreement was for him to convert to Orthodox Christianity and to have his subjects convert as well. And so once Vladimir married the sister of the emperor, Orthodox Christianity became the official religion of the Kievan Rus. And this conversion also means that there's a really strong connection culturally and economically between Kievan Rus and the Byzantine Empire. And so we're going to see that in Kievan Rus, there are going to be people from the Byzantine Empire who move there to work. There are going to be Byzantine advisors to princes of Kievan Rus. Priests and teachers are also going to be sent to Kiev, so there's going to be a lot of cultural exchange between the two regions. We see architectural connections. None of the original structures survive, but this is a good representation of it. The churches in Kiev were constructed in this wooden onion dome fashion, which was also the style of the Byzantine Empire. And we're going to see that also the Kievan Rus region adopts the Cyrillic or Russian alphabet, so they can communicate with one another pretty easily. And eventually Kievan Rus is going to become a theocracy just like the Byzantine Empire, so church and state are going to become intertwined. So what we see is that there is, again, going to be this widespread conversion of the people to Orthodox Christianity, but there are still going to be some pagan traditions that remain in the region. The Kievan Rus experienced its golden age in the 10th and 11th centuries. Just like the name suggests, the golden age meant that the civilization experienced a period of prosperity, relative peace, a strong government, and a really cohesive society. This happened under the rule of Vladimir's son, Yaroslav I, or Yaroslav the Wise. He ruled from 1019 to 1054, and he helped bring about the golden age of Kievan Rus, partly because he gave a lot of attention to the education system in Kiev. As we already talked about, there's a strong connection to the Byzantine Empire, so there's going to be a series of schools and universities that emerge in Kiev. Even though they have a religious founding, they certainly teach a wide variety of subjects. And he also, Yaroslav, is going to codify the legal system in Kiev. This was called the Ruskaya Prava, or Pravda rather, which translated into the Russian justice. And this system of laws was based on Justinian's code. And so again, we see this is a really common theme. It seems like when societies experience a golden age, part of it is because there's this legal stability in the region. The people are well aware of the legal code, the laws, and the consequences to these laws, and this brings about stability and order. This region also was a major supplier of slaves to Constantinople and places farther west. Kievan Rus had a substantial trade connection between east and west, so they traded with Baghdad and other Persian societies to the east, and they also traded with the Baltic ports to the northwest. And the major trading partner of Kievan Rus, not surprisingly, was the Byzantine Empire. The Kievan princes organized annual expeditions to Constantinople to sell many items that were in high demand, things like honey, hides, fur, and timber, but most significantly, slaves. One of the reasons why so many slaves came from the Kievan region was because Kiev did not have a significant agricultural surplus. And so they had more people than they could actually support. And so because they couldn't feed this excess population, they got rid of them. They took people and they sold them as slaves to Constantinople. And so what happened actually is that every year, every fall, Kievan princes would demand tributes from various towns in the region. And tribute was basically a form of payment for protection. And so when these regions could not actually pay tribute in cash, they would pay in slaves. And so basically a number of peasants would leave their local regions and they would be sent to Kiev and then eventually Constantinople to be sold as slaves. And in return for these slaves, Kievan princes were paid in gold, silver, and other riches of the Byzantine Empire. Occasionally, princes were not satisfied with these exchanges and they would send naval expeditions to raid Constantinople, but for the most part, this represented, again, a really strong economic connection between these two places. Kievan Rus eventually will decline, just like the Byzantine Empire, and in fact, the decline of these two places is very much intertwined. Because Kievan Rus was so dependent on the Byzantine Empire, Kievan Rus also experiences economic problems at the same time as the Byzantines. So Constantinople eventually is going to be a harder place to reach because there are going to be so many invasions from nomadic groups from Central Asia. Most importantly, the Mongol peoples. So Kiev's economic fortunes decline at the same time as the Byzantine Empire when trade is no longer as sustainable. In 1169, the northern Russian princes took advantage of Kiev's weaknesses and actually sacked the city, and then they did so again in 1204. And then finally in 1240, Kiev was invaded and taken over by Mongols. And this map here indicates to us the extent of Mongol invasions. This was their area of origin, and the Mongols did push all the way into the Kievan Rus region and eventually ruled this entire area. This was called the Khanate of the Golden Horde. We're going to talk about the Mongols in much more detail later. But what you need to know is that the Mongols actually ruled over this region for about 250 years. The Mongols occupied mainly the steppe regions, so the sort of plateaued grasslands. The reason why the Mongols were more interested in this land was because it was grassy and it was really good for their horses to graze on. So they really were not as interested in the forested areas or some of the more fertile soil. And what we do see is that even though the Mongols took over this region, they allowed the local government to continue to exist. Just like the Principality of Kiev, the Mongols allowed people to essentially govern themselves so long as they paid tribute to the central government. So people paid tribute to the Mongols, and the Mongols essentially left them alone. What's going to happen eventually is that the Mongols are going to be defeated by Russian princes who stand up against them, and that's when modern Russia, or Muscovy, Moscow, is going to be established. But we're going to talk about that in more detail later. And then lastly, I just wanted to highlight a key city in Russia, which is going to be a really good example of the multicultural nature of the region, as well as the substantial effect that trade had on the economy. So Novgorod is a city that's located on the Volga River. It was founded by a Scandinavian man named Rurik in the 10th century. And this city emerges to be one of the largest in Kievan Rus. It had a population of about 400,000, and it was a very multicultural population. So you had people coming from Finland, Sweden, and many of the Slav-speaking regions also. And the city prospered because of its extensive trade network. The Volga River connects the Baltic Sea, which accesses all these different Scandinavian regions, and it also connects the Black Sea to the south, which, as you know, via Constantinople, leads into the Mediterranean Sea. Major trade products included furs, honey, and tar from the northern regions, cloth and metals from farther west, and then grains from farther east. And the growth of the city of Novgorod was representative of the growth of many cities between the year 800 and 1300. And one of the reasons why this city grew so well was that in addition to the prosperous trade network, there was a warmth in the climate. And because of that, there's going to be more agricultural productivity because of a longer growing season. And with that, there's going to be a greater surplus of food. And when there's more food, that means that a greater merchant and trading class can emerge because not everybody has to be farming. There's going to be a period when Novgorod becomes independent from the Kievan Rus. This happens in the 12th century. Eventually, the Russian Empire will reabsorb Novgorod and the region that surrounds it, and that happens once the Russians win control back from the Mongols. And so now Novgorod is part of modern Russia, but there was a period where it existed independently from Muscovy Russia. So that concludes our conversation about the Byzantine Empire and the early days of Russia. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you soon.